Ah, it's Monday. Oh, wait. Casual Monday. The time hath come. Casual Monday is reborn in a new, even more casual form. It's so casual, I'm sitting down. In fact, even this nightshirt feels too formal. That's better. A Casual Monday was originally a one-season experiment way back in 2018, where I did a weekly video that was something of a sampler platter of the previous week's seasonal anime releases. About halfway through the season, I narrowed the field to a half dozen works that I discussed each week, and I got lucky that it happened to be a particularly excellent season. The new Casual Monday is a similar idea, but expanded. Seasonal anime is still the main course, but as an ongoing show, I can add lots of other recurring segments. The first is that we're going to choose an older series for a rewatch, something we have done repeatedly in our Discord. We're doing nominations this week, voting the week after, and then I'll announce the first chosen show in the Casual Monday after that. Then, each week, one of the segments in this lineup will be the newest episode of whatever series is on the docket, just as if it was a currently airing work. And I say rewatch, but half the time they are series that I haven't yet seen, and I will specify which is the case when we have a winner. I've got another segment I'll also add in the upcoming weeks, a short little behind-the-scenes affair, but I'll explain that when it arrives. But for today's show, and next week's as well, I'm playing a little catch-up with this fall 2024 season. There was never going to be a good jumping-in point, so I wanted to start after my preview show and choose a few works each week to share my initial thoughts. Today there are just 4 shows, as I had a vexingly short window in which to produce this video. We are looking at the first 4 episodes of Dan to Dan, the first 4 of Let This Grieving Soul Retire, the first 3 of Demon Lord 2099, and about half of the first 4 episodes of Re:Zero's 3rd season. We are covering Re:Zero in dual streams on its release day as well, so it's always going to be in the lineup while it is airing. Next week I know I will add Orb and Blue Box, and I'll figure out what else I want to discuss as I catch up to the season. That's it. Very simple. Very casual. Dan. Alright, Cider Insider, you didn't have to cook so hard. I'm glad you did, though. What a treat these first 4 episodes have been. I quite understand why they screened several as a single movie-like event earlier this year. If you want to build a critical mass of hype for your new work, do that. The visual splendor is going to get a lot of the attention, no doubt, so let me begin with talking about the use of color. There's a point in the first episode when the series itself opens up, when the fantastical, rumored entities turn out to be no mere rumors. From then on, we have something of a color motif in play. A Turbo Granny or her borrowed power has red theming, the telekinesis aliens have this unsettling blue thing, and Momo's spiritual power this seafoam green. The ensuing first fight is thus a battle of hues, as rising or falling advantage for each participant is marked with their representative color, spilling out more or less onto the more monochromatic environment in which they contend. This is especially helpful when you have something invisible in play, like the power wielded by Momo and the aliens, but I feel its true impact is in how the simplified color palette turns the sequence into this high-contrast clash of shape and form that is far removed from what their everyday resembled. That is, the weirdness of the situation is echoed by the departure in appearance. We have left the normal world behind us. Now that would be effective on its own, but it's kicked up a notch in the middle when Okarun confesses the subject he had avoided earlier, the origin of his interest in aliens. The short montage of his young self, so desperately lonely that he was calling to the skies in hopes that someone somewhere would be his friend, is a raw bit. But it is also rendered in full color and detail of the normal world, looking just like the scenes before the wager begins. Cutting away from the stylized battle inside the spaceship to those scenes creates a kind of visual pause, like putting a beat of silence in a speech for emphasis. It puts an exclamation mark on the pathos of the confession. It also creates a dichotomy between their old world and the new one. As chaotic and confusing this sudden thrust into the supernatural may be, the normal life from before may not be so great either. We get another almost reversal of this color work in the encounter with the Flatwoods alien, who creates a kind of walled-in space that darkens and desaturates everything. While we again have some of the red color peeking out when Okarun transforms, it's strangled and muted compared to the fight against the first alien trio. It does not cast any red light on the surrounding surfaces. Momo uses her power, but it emits no color at all in this closed space. When Momo figures out how to reapply the seal without frying Okarun, and the alien is defeated, we now have a return to normal that feels more like relief. It's as if to say that while this sudden plunge into the supernatural is exciting compared to the mundane, there is still something to be said for the way they lived before. It's a kind of endorsement of a middle way, told in part through this manipulation of the color palette. Not that they actually get to rest back in the familiar world, as Momo's state means she can't maintain the suppression of the curse, and they are immediately in trouble. That ends up just being an opportunity to introduce her grandmother in a rather impactful manner. I don't know if Momo's memories of her, where she seems so much softer, more traditionally attired, are accurate, or some kind of idealization. They certainly set us up to expect something a far cry from this bat-wielding baddie. Another awesome character introduction, and a bat that is actually a giant implement for sketching barrier circles, is a pretty compelling design choice. What I want to highlight in that bit, though, is the effectiveness of the exposition. Her encounter with a fully possessed Okarun involves this battle of drawn circles and warding nails. She explains how it works, which is just telling us how it works, but it's done with integration to the action. It doesn't feel like expo speak because of its proximity to the thing it describes. It builds up our understanding of the rules governing this power until the last bit, erasing the circle edge to collapse the effects together, and that does not need to be explained at all. Exposition slows down stories, but is still necessary to some degree for the audience to understand things that are outside their experience. These 4 episodes then leverage that fact to great effect by building a foundation of audience understanding ahead of time. What I mean is that we get the whole sequence in the 2nd episode explaining the seals and how they work. In the 3rd, we get this explanation of the nails and the circles. Later in the 3rd, we also get the explanation of location-bound spirits and the idea of gods having their own territories, home games and away games. These little bits of audience education are spaced out and don't burden their respective scenes too much, but the real payoff is at the climax of this arc, as the train with Turbo Granny and the crab hurtle toward the edge of Kamigoe City. Cutting to a shot of talisman-festooned poles and warding nails in the track is all we need at this point to understand, and so this climactic moment is not slowed down a bit by needing to exposit. It happens at full speed because of the earlier work to give us the tools to know at a glance what is unfolding. That is effective storytelling. Now, I love all the spectacle, to be sure, but I really love a work that plays with ideas. The one that really strikes my interest is the threat that Momo and Okarun face when their investigative tests of courage turn surprisingly real. Turbo Granny, as she puts it, gobbles his weenie, while Momo is stripped and restrained by aliens intending to impregnate her. This is an attack on their sexual agency and bodily autonomy, but I find some echo in their earlier situations. Momo's boyfriend complains about her not putting out, is trying to pressure her into getting a love hotel, and demanding she pay for it too. What a romantic. He's not above getting physical with her either. Now, Momo is with him because of how he looks, but it's because his form matches her idea of masculinity. In this case, though, a masculinity that is threatening, that is interested in what she can provide sexually, and though in a completely alien way, so is our telekinetic trio. Okarun, by contrast, has a kind of impotence, a sense of powerlessness. His crisis is more of being perceived as absent that masculinity, and the gobbled weenie is the supernatural echo of his social state. Each of them, then, proceed to rebel against these supernatural parallels. Momo rescues herself, in a sense, and does so effectively in defiance of being aroused against her wishes. This is a source of desire that has a wrongness to it, and so too was dating that loser just because of his resemblance to a movie star. Okarun must reclaim his weenie to lift the curse in a narrative mechanical sense, sure, but doing anything so reckless and bold requires him to act in ways that he hasn't previously. To be crass, he must grow a pair to regain a pair. And while, again, it has narrative purpose, it's interesting that Turbo Granny returns the weenie right after they make the boldest, riskiest moves of traveling to the tunnel to challenge her. There's another interesting little bit in the orbit of this masculinity treatment. At the end of episode 4, we'll be told about the origin of the location-bound crab spirit. Young women that were violated and then murdered, dumped in the tunnel. Presuming that the perpetrators were men, this spirit is a kind of amalgamation of the worst outcomes of male aggression. Turbo Granny's alliance with them and the weenie gobbling now leave me with a question. Remember, it wasn't just Okarun. The curse went after the bananas of the aliens as well. There was direct hostility towards the most representative masculine feature. Now, I don't think all of this is meant as an attack on maleness or masculine things in general, but I do find myself wondering about a challenge levied at a certain idea of masculinity. Okarun is really named Ken Takakura, the same as the actor who forms Momo's picture of ideal manliness. She cannot reconcile Okarun's looks and demeanor with Ken-san's name. Okarun doesn't match her idea of what a man should be. I thus wonder if our story's continuation will mean more challenges to the notion of a masculine ideal. In fact, I'm half wondering if Momo's powers being somewhat sealed after their initial awakening has something to do with this dissonance that she's experiencing. Changing her perception of Okarun as they spend time together might address both of these things then. One last thing, the fact that they will be spending more time together. Technically, the defeat of Turbo Granny ends the circumstance that made them have to work together. When Okarun leaves to go home, he says sayonara, subtitled for us as goodbye, but there is a little more nuance here. Sayonara has more of a sense of finality to it than a simple goodbye. It denotes a more significant departure or else a greater formality. Closer perhaps to saying, fare thee well, or take care of yourself. There's a subtext of no expectation that said parties would meet again soon, or that they are not close enough for casual speech. There's a reason you don't hear it much, outside of situations where someone means a permanent parting, such as when they're about to deliver a coup de grace. Instead, we usually hear more casual phrases like jane, bye-bye, or what Momo then amends, mata ashita, see you tomorrow. Anyway, I like having both of them repeat that word as he walks away, as once it's said, it feels wrong to both of them, and Okarun repeating it seems to feel it becoming true. Visually, then, the framing shrinks him against the background. The camera pulls back, so to speak, making him look isolated and distant. Visually, he is going back to who he was, the ostracized occult nerd and bully magnet. Bravo to the crunchy subs, who even put the subtitles at the top of the screen and away from him. You don't even get translated words for company. Thus, Momo calling out to him with a goodbye that implies they will see each other carries the subtext that he is not, in fact, going back to who he was. The curse bound them for a time, but something else binds them now. Now, I don't know that I'll talk about this one every week or anything. It just entertained me, even though many shows like this one do not, so I at least wanted to discuss its first arc. Let This Grieving Soul Retire seems like it's all about turning a character's imposter syndrome into an engine for both narrative and comedy. From Karai's perspective, he is ordinary, perhaps even ill-suited to the role of treasure hunter itself, to say nothing of being in a top party, or a top clan, or especially from being a leader of any kind. But somehow, everyone else sees him as remarkable, even infallible. Is this just an incredibly long string of failing upwards, eventually reaching a critical mass of success that makes everyone assume he must know what he's doing? If the Grievers are a top party and First Step's a top clan, then obviously their leader must be something truly special, right? It's kind of an Emperor's New Clothes setup, except the Emperor seems to be the only one who sees that he's naked. Now, I normally don't like secondhand embarrassment humor, and this is very close to being so. Karai doesn't seem to have a plan or know the things that people assume he does, and so there's tension baked into most of his scenes of waiting for others to see through the ruse. It's less about how will the characters get out of this sticky situation, and more about how will Karai continue to maintain the charade. And I guess because he does, that he never actually faces the shame of being found out, that it doesn't become the actual embarrassment humor that I struggle to enjoy. In fact, I suspect that teetering on the edge without ever going over is why I find this as funny as I do, and maybe someone who doesn't mind cringe humor might find it less so. At the very least, I understand why Karai wants to retire. In fact, I feel physically ill trying to imagine living as he does, always on the brink of being exposed as a phony. He has an enviable position on the surface, widely and wildly respected, has fame and wealth and a host of powerful people that are loyal to him. He is what young, up-and-coming treasure hunters dream of becoming, but he can't enjoy it because of the fear of being found out. He constantly delegates whatever he can, which seems like he's shirking responsibility, but since he has no faith in himself to make capable decisions, I suspect this is partially motivated by a belief that anyone else would do a better job than he could. I find myself wondering, though, if this is actually true. Karai might be something of an unreliable narrator. He loves relics and loves collecting them, but as he says, he needs a relic for every single thing he does. The implication being, he has no ability or strength, just a massive bag of tricks. But the sequence with the Purgatorial Sword has me wondering. At a glance, and with almost no effort, Karai pulls vast potential out of the sword, something its actual owner seemingly couldn't dream of managing. Maybe this is just a result of his relic obsession, like knowing the right buttons to push, but I found myself wondering if he might have some actual kind of talent or finely honed skill that draws maximum effectiveness out of such things. As something similar happens with the Night Hiker cloak, his Vice Clan master even remarks on the defective nature of the thing, an uncontrollable form of propulsion with no safeties or brakes. And while Karai certainly acts like he is helplessly along for the ride, he nevertheless flies exactly to where he needed to be. I enjoy the ambiguity inherent to the setup then. Him ending up exactly in the right place, in a way that makes him appear to save the day, could be that he really is in control and just doesn't believe it, or it could just be the rule of funny at work, that the story universe bends however it needs in order to deliver a humorous outcome rather than a plausible one. The whole series could go this way even, with nothing ever coming in to arbitrate between the possibilities. Since we see that Karai has no issue with collecting even cursed relics, I am amusing myself to imagine that he accidentally ended up with a curse that undermines his confidence. There's something of an irony at play with this idea of believing in one's capabilities. Karai has none in himself, despite his high station, but other people find the idea of his belief in them as something inspiring and driving. The flashback reveal of the Griever's masks shows us that Karai forgot to add eye holes, but the other 5 don't interpret it as a bungled move on his part. It is instead a protection against blinding attacks. And what's more, if they learn how to move as before while wearing them, then surely they'll get even stronger. And since we see that they do wear the masks in the present, they actually did rise to the accidental challenge. Likewise with Tino's ad hoc party. Tino, bless her heart, has unshakable faith in Karai. From her, we learn that his habit of foisting quests onto others is perceived as him pushing their limits, the actions of a leader trying to strengthen those in his charge, not of one shirking responsibility. Throughout their misadventure, then, Tina was convinced that Karai would not have sent them on a mission they could not manage to overcome, and she spreads that conviction to the others. Because of that faith, they take on the wolf creatures rather than retreating. Believing that there was a way to succeed, they actually look for it. It's almost like the thing with the relics, where he seems to be pulling maximum effectiveness out of the things and people that he interacts with. I'm kind of wondering if that is his actual power or talent, and if his party members know it. But again, it could just be constant serendipity played for laughs, and it still works in either case. Speaking of his party members, I actually really like what they have done with introducing the Grievers so far. We'll probably keep getting these tiny flashback vignettes to show how they went from 6 childhood friends to this top party, but there's been an intentional absence of their present-day, overpowered selves. When Liz shows up, all of the work to show power scaling to that point pays off, as she is clearly way off the chart of what we'd seen, and we don't even know about the mask thing until after the fact. Meeting Liz, too, helps clarify something else about the possibility of Karai as an unreliable narrator. He originally tried to leave the party because he thought the others would never kick him out, that they were childhood friends and would keep him around even if he was dragging down their full potential. They make him the leader instead, but if we only listen to Karai, then we might think this was something like pity. It seems like he doesn't necessarily go on treasure hunts with them, so perhaps being made the leader is like giving him a desk job. Administrative, or maybe even ceremonial, and then they can have it both ways. Keep him in the party, but not get held back by his limited potential. However, none of Liz's behavior towards him aligns with that reading. She wants his praise, has been trying to change herself after he asked her to work on holding back, shifts off her tirade against Tino when he praises her group leadership, takes off the mask when he asks her to, and just generally has this kind of fawning disposition towards him. She is also kind of nuts, and I simultaneously feel bad for Tino and now completely understand why she acts the way she does. I now expect that each of the other grievers will end up being nuts or extreme in some way or another, though I am unsure how many of them we will meet in the present. And so, since Liz seems to have a screw loose, we still have to wonder how competent or incompetent Cry actually is, as we can't trust her judgment on the matter. We at least know that some of his party are not humoring him, but actually believe in him like everyone else. Perhaps completely undeserved, but amazingly consistent. Last thing I want to mention is Tino, who in a lot of ways carries the show so far. She's a bundle of contradictions herself, oscillating between blushing maiden and ruthless hardass. Even her design reflects this, with her floofy hair and cute ribbons on top, and an all-business black leather thieves getup on bottom, which the camera certainly loves. She is framed in titillating ways so blatantly and often that it stops being fan service and becomes comedy instead. And yet, she is arguably the most developed character in the series thus far. We see her when she leads, see her when she follows, how she takes stock, how she takes charge. We see her in fear and mastering that fear. See her hopeful and in despair, dead serious and completely frivolous. She has multiple goals, she's resourceful, she's proud and loyal and determined, and might have already expressed every possible human emotion through 4 episodes. And I guess it's Tino that makes me optimistic about the series as a whole. She could so easily have been this one-note punchline, a lodestone for humorous misfortune, but instead, she might be more fleshed out than Cry himself. Neat trick, that. Demon Lord 2099 just barely snuck in at the last second for my preview show coverage, and I ended up being rather curious about it. I like a good genre mashup, and it certainly delivers on that front. It's got a Rip Van Winkle thing going on, with Veritoru's jumping 500 years to the future, but it's not only that, as the merger with Earth 80 years prior adds a quasi-isekai element. It's not just his world but more modern, but it's also not like going to a completely new world either. Both original cultures are affected by the other. Alnaith's magic and fantasy collide with Earth technology, causing rapid modernization, while Earth is infused with supernatural things like immortals and spellcasting. And all of it is removed from our present, thrust to the end of the 21st century in something that is part cyberpunk, part urban fantasy. The setting is not the only alien part either, as the whole order of things that Veritoru takes for granted has been upended. The Magitech advancement means there are weapons that now make the immortals not so immortal, and a kind of pogrom in the recent past means many surviving ones are in hiding. The Familia chips trivialize spellcasting, and Veritoru's previous advantage is not just nullified, but has become a disadvantage when it turns out that he can't utilize the new tech. What makes someone mighty in this world is completely different than the one he left. In fact, it seems like the idea of heroes and demon lords and kings and great nations may all be just forgotten relics. No one cares who the 6 dark peers are anymore. No one fears the sound of his name. Belief in him at all has waned so much that he has effectively been depowered. The premiere episode, then, is largely centered on him facing these realities as they batter his preconceptions. Partially through Machina's instructions, and partially through his encounter with Marcus, Veritoru is made to understand that there will be no picking up where he left off. Throughout it, he mostly maintains his imperious manner, bristling at signs of disrespect, and taking for granted that he should be able to demand of others. This high-handed dealing isn't sympathetic to the audience, necessarily, us being more like the lowly mortals that he denigrates, but it's consistent with who he was previously. It's just that his values and expectations are now dissonant with the new reality that he inhabits. Thus, having him walk around like he owns the place and be repeatedly humbled gives him a rocky start towards establishing himself as a protagonist the audience would root for. I was thus rather struck by how it manages to pull something of a reversal right at the end of the first episode. Veritoru is injured in both pride and body, and Machina is taking him to her home. At first he thinks the large building in front of him is what she means, but it is instead the modest apartment beside. And upon entering, Veritoru first thinks it's a small storeroom, and even believes she is joking when she says it is her home, but no, this is all she can manage with her low salary. She hangs her head and doesn't look at him throughout this. This is all she can offer her lord. She is deeply ashamed. But Verotoru, understanding she's been living like this and dutifully waiting to resurrect him, jokes no further. He says the true depth of her loyalty has been burned into his eyes, and that she has served him well. She is overcome with emotion, and it seems clear that she'd been dreading the moment when she had to show him this, had been bracing for his disappointment. And all at once, Verotoru seems less like a haughty man of privilege getting his comeuppance, and more like someone possessed of nobility. Anachronistic he may be, but in this I can imagine how he might inspire loyalty in others. And it's such a deft turnabout in his portrayal that I thought, crap, you got me, storyteller. I have to see what else you have in store. The next episode expands the world building a bit by setting him up to try to function in the new reality, giving us examples of shopping, the personal assistant to the Familia, and his attempts at finding work. He's constantly exposed to new things, new foods, new clothing, but takes it in stride, compliments Machina for her efforts and her aid. His desire to work is a further softening of his original manner. He's not the king of anything right now, and won't be reliant on Machina to support them both. He is not too proud or self-important to labor. When he simply shouts out that he's looking for work and is told he can't do that sort of thing on this guy's turf, he doesn't clap back, but says, well, he's done them a disservice. He apologizes. He's not really able to find work in a traditional way, the lack of a familia being a non-starter, though kudos to the guy who takes his wild resume in stride at the commercial guild. What a grizzled pro of a bureaucrat this man is. After being introduced, or I guess reintroduced, to Takahashi, the second episode ends up also hitting us with an unexpected final direction when the suggested job to pursue is as a stream personality. This is such an amusingly apropos direction for someone who is powered by their own renown, but cannot rise to prominence in the traditional fantasy way. All he has to do, really, is just maintain his demon lord bearing. That's no different than other streamers who adopt a persona for a kind of shared roleplay experience. He just doesn't have to pretend. Even better, he apparently gains the power of faith from positive and negative emotions, so feeding the trolls is actually constructive for his purposes. Even if Machina can't stand to see all the disrespect, Verotoru is unbothered, even welcoming of anyone who wants to be a viewer. After this has been a reasonable success, Verotoru makes the surprising discovery that Graham the hero who killed him 500 years ago is alive and right in the same city. If Verotoru has been humbled by the way the world has changed, then Graham has been defeated utterly. He has made seemingly no attempt to adapt, even still wears his cape and armor and sword. Their halting conversation reveals that Verotoru's ambition for world domination is really one of world peace. Like many villains, he's a kind of well-intentioned extremist who would eliminate strife and conflict through iron rule. He sees it as a struggle between the weak and the strong, while our hero thinks of it in terms of light and dark. Verotoru's defeat centuries before did not usher in peace, but just led to the mortals fighting each other instead, Graham having to kill off some of the lives he thought he had been saving. And although intended as a reward, his gift of eternal youth separates him from other mortals while not making him one of the immortal. Being a hero without a demon lord to face makes him persona non grata to the world which followed. Despite living through the 500 years, Graham manages to be even more of an anachronism than Verotoru. I guess then, what I found compelling in these episodes is Verotoru's consistency of character. His initial brashness and sense of dignity are still present, but he has molded them to suit a circumstance beyond anything he could have been prepared for. He's living as a game streamer in a rundown part of a cyberpunk fantasy city, yet somehow manages to come off as regal. And even though he and Machina have a lord and vassal relationship, it's clear he takes her well-being seriously and does not take her loyalty for granted. He creates this interesting dynamic where the old-fashioned, even alien idea of monarchy and allegiance seems refreshingly wholesome against the desperateness of what we see around them. Which I guess is exactly the kind of thing I wanted out of a genre mashup like this. Aria Zero Season 3. Especially thanks to the extra-long premiere, there is a ton already to talk about in the new season. We've been covering it in streams as well, so I have been immersed in a whole lot of chatter and speculations and observations, so much so that I can abandon any attempt to be exhaustive. So I'm going to talk about maybe 40% of the things I thought are particularly worth pointing out, and then the rest of them in next week's Casual Monday, and then an episode at a time as they release, now and in the winter continuation. The first is the new character Liliana. I know we haven't heard much from her outside the opening, but she seems to have some vague kind of power, and there are two parts to what we have seen so far. The first is more obvious, that she seems to have some kind of influence over people with her music. Kiritaka is smitten with her, it's the first thing we're even told about him, but once we see the songstress in action, it appears to be more than just a case of an admiring fan. When she plays for Subaru in their first meeting, he will join in halfway through, even able to produce lyrics and harmonize despite it being a song newly created. We'll later see Priscilla, of all people, dancing to her tune quite literally. And when Liliana refuses Priscilla's offer to become her personal singer, Subaru and Amelia and Betty and the audience all brace for how Priscilla will react. But she doesn't lash out, or denigrate, or fume, or anything that we'd be inclined to expect. She's gracious, even commends Liliana for her impressive faith, even tries to teach her how to wink, though with no ready success. We also see that Liliana plays for the whole town via the broadcast media, and people everywhere stop and listen, pleasantly smiling along, as she's like a bard archetype in an RPG with an ability to charm. Considering how downright lousy this world is with divine blessings and protections, I am not going to be shocked to learn that she is walking around with one of them. Now, introducing this musical magical influence in the same episode where we see Sirius's power certainly invites us to compare them, and we'll get to Sirius later. But Liliana seems to have another, more subtle thing going on. If the music playing is charm, then this other power I would call inspiration. She seems to pull things from the aether to come up with her near-instant new songs, and they might relate to the people around her. When Subaru first encounters her, he interrupts her by calling out the horrible lyrics, but when we take a closer look at them, they could easily be about Subaru himself. I wander with no destination, no money, no future, no dreams even. All I have is my pride. I'm just a pathetic person. There's also the bit where she asks Subaru to go get them some snacks, and then repeats herself, refusing to move forward. And Subaru highlights this in his otaku way, comparing it to a choose-your-own-adventure where he can't move on without saying yes. When that exact moment ends up being the return-by-death reset point, though, suddenly we should look at her behavior a little more closely. Did she fix on that request out of some instinctual hunch? Does she detect whatever it is that determines the thresholds of Subaru's power? I don't imagine she understands what she's doing. It probably literally seems like creative inspiration to her, but some kind of plucking the truth out of the air appears to be the pattern. Assuming such, there's one thing she says that I really want to pay attention to. Just before they go to meet Kiritaka, she will make a comment about her way, and talks about weighing honor against empathy on the scales, and then shattering them. Even then, we talked about the possibility of Tiefin being involved in the story because of that line, as judging others was her shtick, and shattering them her method. But the other part I really am interested in is that weighing of honor against empathy. One of the things the premiere seems to promise is an increased focus on Julius and Reinhard and their positions as knights. Specifically, Reinhard's situation of supporting Felt, being estranged from Wilhelm, and in contention with his father, who is his superior officer. And then, similarly, Julius's conversation with Subaru, where he admits that he wanted to react in one way, but his duty demands he do otherwise. The idea of honor, in their case perhaps the behavior prescribed to them by being Knights of Lagunica, will contend with empathy, understanding how that behavior impacts or is received by others. I fully expect that they will be presented with bad outcomes that are technically expected of them against good outcomes that are what they really want. Indeed, Reinhard might already be in that situation with Heinkel's hostage-taking of Felt. We already know that he will bend if he can on a technicality, such as way back at the beginning when he admits that officially he cannot overlook what Felt and Romji have done, but unfortunately he's off duty, though he does end up taking her for a completely different reason. And so let's talk about Felt. Two things in particular. One is that it increasingly seems like she might be the kidnapped royal from 15 years prior, the one who Wilhelm tried to recover, which led to the conditions for Teresia's death and the falling out between grandfather and grandson. Way back in episode 3, it seemed obvious Reinhard was trying to figure out if Felt was someone in particular after seeing the insignia respond to her touch. He wants to know her age and her family name, and learning that she thinks she's 15 does not dissuade his persistence. He will say that the matter of the stolen insignia is trivial in comparison to the gravity of overlooking the crime unfolding before him. Later on, Subaru will run across Romji and catch him up on this event, and he'll muse that it just had to be in Austria. That certainly suggests that Felt is more than she appears, and that Romji knows so. When we add all that to the story of the kidnapping that Julius tells Subaru, we even wonder if Romji was involved in the plot. After all, he knew how to sneak into the heavily guarded throne room when he attempted to steal her out of the royal selection. But certainly, we now understand Reinhard's determination. The kidnapped royal and the fallout had a major impact on his family. If he has found said royal and can restore them, then I imagine he believes that much that was wrong will be put right. But not so fast, Reinhard. The other thing to mention about Felt is what she wants. While Reinhard tries and tries to turn the street kid into a princess, she is in turn trying to change her knight into someone who acts on what he wants, rather than presenting as the person he believes he is supposed to be. I think Felt in this year they've spent together has got him pretty well pinned down, and this synergizes with what I said earlier about weighing honor against empathy. Even in the predicament with Heinkel holding her at sword point, I am unconvinced that she is actually so helpless. I mean, we saw her contend with Elsa way back, and she has the divine protection of wind to boot. I won't be surprised if she is intentionally testing Reinhard by playing along. Speaking of honor, there is a kind of warrior honor ritual that plays out at times in the series, and one that got a little twist in the 4th episode. What I refer to is the giving of one's name. For whatever reason, the Sin Archbishops introduce themselves in encounters, whether by custom or because it terrorizes people, I'm unsure. Regulus will get downright hostile if you do not return in kind. But we also see it among warriors about to do battle. Reinhard and Elsa exchange their names before their fight, and Elsa does it again with Garfield in the 2nd season. This past episode, though, we got a warning from Al, telling Subaru specifically to not give his real name to the Archbishop of Gluttony. Since we know the eating of names is what creates a situation like Rem's, I have to imagine this is why he gives such advice. But what stands out to me is that this perverts the honorable exchange of names. Their insistence on introducing themselves, and especially Regulus demanding the same in return, is setting people up for gluttony. They are twisting something that is meant as a show of respect into a weapon. They do the same thing with love, but I suspect that may end up being a huge through line in the series, and so we'll have to give it more space at a future date. For right now, I wanted to mention Sirius's version. I was particularly fond of how they introduced her power, right at the end of that long premiere. The scene drags on with her just being conciliatory and saying nothing of meaning, and it starts to strain credibility that these people keep giving her the time of day. And at some point, the wrongness of the scene finally boils over, and we realize we're seeing some kind of power at work. And from there, it's just wondering what in the world it's all building toward. And what a doozy it was, too. Linking everyone's fates together by making their emotions synchronize and feedback off one another. It was a deeply unpleasant hysteria to witness, and the head-splitting punctuation mark to it all was quite the introduction for our new Archbishop. A few more loops fill out a little more of our understanding of her power, and then we get a completely different encounter once Emilia comes on the scene. Sirius recognizes her, and suddenly she seems like she represents wrath indeed. She gave her name as Sirius Romana Conti, the same as Betelgeuse, and her ire towards Emilia seems to come from a place of intense jealousy. While we can kind of figure out that her marriage to Betelgeuse might only exist in her own mind, it's reason enough to want to kill the half-elf that Juice was so obsessed over. The thing I wanted to note is that Sirius assaults Emilia with words as well as weapons, insulting her features. Ironic, since it seems plain that Sirius must look similar, with the same eyes, silver hair, and pointed elf ears under those bandages. But I bring it up because of how Emilia reacts. She says, "My eyes, my voice, and my silver hair are all things the person I love praised," and further, that Sirius insulting them makes her angry. This is a change from the Amelia who used to be so self-conscious about her features. They'd earned her nothing but scorn because of the resemblance to Satella, and she used to hide herself when possible. Being praised by a loved one, though, has changed her orientation to this part of herself. We can perhaps extrapolate, then, that she has not been hiding herself or going in disguise of late. Certainly she has not done so during the 3rd season so far, and I thought that was a neat bit of implied growth on her part. Now, unfortunately, Amelia ends that episode by potentially becoming a damsel in distress when Regulus announces he's claiming her as his 79th wife. I have some things I want to say about Regulus, but since I think he'll be in the 5th episode, I'm going to save them. Instead, I just want to comment on the possibility of Amelia as damsel in distress. It's not a trope I love, and since she's pretty capable, I'm not sure that'll actually be how this plays out. However, it strikes me that Regulus's behavior towards Amelia might end up serving the purpose of holding a mirror up to Subaru's own. Regulus has designated her as his, and taken it upon himself to protect her, and begins making plans for their future, and does all of it without a single bit of input from Amelia herself. In fact, he didn't even know her name was Amelia. I'm struck by how much that situation echoes Subaru's own at the story's beginning, right down to not even learning her real name until the end of the 3rd episode. I'm really interested to see where the next episode takes this particular thread. We'll finish this by mentioning our 2 newest introductions, Capella Emerata Lagunica Chansama and Roy Alfard, who apparently is also the Archbishop of Gluttony, along Lai Batankatos that we had already met. Like every archbishop so far, these are all star names. Capella is a star in the Auriga constellation, the Charioteer, and the star name itself means little goat. Batankatos is a star in the Cetus constellation, the Whale, something I have mentioned in a past video. He is the one who referred to the white whale as his pet. Now that there is another gluttony archbishop kicking around, Roy Alfard, we seem to have a pattern. There are 3 great maw beasts, the white whale, the black serpent, and the great rabbit. Roy's last name is Alfard, which is a star in the Hydra constellation. If Lai maps to the white whale, then Roy here must map to one of the other 2, in theory. Hydra might suit the black serpent, and what I would think of readily, but the mythological Hydra also replaced lost heads with 2 new ones, a replication feat that makes me think of the great rabbit as well. What we might can assume, though, is that the presence of Roy and Lai suggests there will be a 3rd gluttony archbishop as well. If Roy maps to the black serpent, then we might expect the 3rd constellation to be Lepus, the hare, whose brightest star is named Arneb. If this is the pattern, then we might meet another archbishop with that as their last name. If Roy maps to the rabbit, though, then perhaps the 3rd constellation will be Serpens, whose brightest star is named Eunuchelhe. Eunuchelhe, that's it. And that will be the new name. Our gluttony archbishops use first-person plural to refer to themselves, Oretachi and Bokatachi, but what does this mean? Is this one person with multiple personalities, switching names and attire? Is it 3 distinct people who are linked in some way? Or are they like the white whale, which could create 2 copies of itself but had a main body? All of these seem equally possible to me in this particular story universe. We know Lai was able to erase people from memories, the same as the whale. If these are separate people, will their powers then also mirror their respective maw beast? Coming back to our Archbishop of Lust, finally, I'm amused by the picture her introduction paints, referring to herself as Lagunica Chan-sama. Giving herself honorifics by itself is suggestive of arrogance, but she seemed to want both the cuteness of Chan and the reverence of Sama, and so went for both. But, perhaps in character, if she is actually the former royal who shares the non-star part of her name. Since the royal family of Lagunica had a contract with a dragon as their whole shtick, and indeed, finding candidates to resume that contract is the major storyline so far, it's maybe only slightly shocking to find her so, dragony? As wild as the archbishops have all been, they at least have all been human form. Capella here seems to have a human form too, if it's the same person who made the first announcement. You can briefly see that she has sharp canines, and so is perhaps like some of our transforming demi-humans. What I confess I'm more curious about is whatever was happening during the broadcast that caused everyone to hold their ears in pain. Does it have anything to do with all the weird xenomorph egg sac things all over the ground? Or is that some other horror that is the handiwork of our two atypical cultists? So many things happened all at once there, the characters didn't even get to process much about them, and Capella trundles off after a demonstration of her regenerative powers. In fact, she didn't actually do anything except taunt them and leave, come to think of it. The reason I bring it up is that we should expect her to have an authority of some kind, and we have had demonstrations of all the other ones. Was the sound in the broadcast that authority? Or is it the egg things? Or are they the same thing? We appear to be weaving quite the Gordian knot of crises through 4 episodes. Chaotic is how things feel so far. We're not even sure which things are yet set in stone, if Subaru's reset point has moved up or not. Though I suspect that the circumstance at the end of the 3rd episode is probably fixed, if you made me guess. I'm beginning to suspect that the first half of Season 3 is only going to be about laying out all the complications and obstacles, perhaps with none of them resolved or advanced. Anyway, there's a lot more to talk about, like Garfield and Mimi and his mother, Betty, Regulus, and the Austria family drama, but I didn't want this first Casual Monday to be 2/3 just RE0 stuff, so we'll continue to talk about all the new episodes next week as well. Thus concludes our short and very casual Monday. I'll see you next week.